All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Have you ever stopped to think about how Japan went from isolated ancient island chiefdoms to a modern global economic powerhouse? Well, today we are unpacking the complete foundational story of Japan. And what we're going to see is this absolutely fascinating historical rhythm. It's a pattern of explosive, rapid cycles of reinvention, followed by these incredibly deep, long periods of cultural incubation. You can actually see that rhythm right here on this timeline. It's basically our roadmap for today. We've got these long stretches of internal focus, like the classical Heian era or the Edo isolation, and they are suddenly punctuated by lightning-fast paradigm shifts. It's almost like the historical heartbeat of the nation. To make sense of over 2 millennia of history, we're going to tackle this in 5 chapters: Origins and the Classical Golden Age, Warring States and Unifiers, the Edo period and Close Country, Black Ships and Modernization, and finally, Empire, War, and Rebirth. So, Chapter 1, Origins and Classical Golden Age. Let's start at the very beginning to see how Japan first forged its unique cultural identity. Okay, the really crucial thing to grasp here is the massive gap between the myth and the reality. According to Japan's ancient text, the Kojiki, the empire was founded in 660 BCE by Emperor Jimmu, who was said to be a direct descendant of the sun goddess. Pretty epic, right? But the archaeological evidence tells a completely different, yet equally wild story. Around the 3rd century BCE, the Yayoi people migrated over from the Asian continent. They brought iron technology and rice agriculture with them, and they essentially overwhelmed the native Jomon hunter-gatherers. The ultimate irony here? The Yamato court actually codified those divine sun goddess myths centuries later, literally just to legitimize their own political rule over the unified tribes. Moving forward a bit, as the central government shifted to a new capital in Kyoto at the end of the 8th century, Japan kind of took a step back. They gradually stopped imitating Tang China and entered this long, peaceful era focused entirely on refining their own indigenous aesthetics. This was the Heian period, and appropriately enough, Heian literally translates to peace. Now, you've got to love the incredible duality of this era. On one hand, you have astounding cultural heights. Aristocratic women, who weren't burdened by the strict rules of learning formal Chinese script, used the newly invented Japanese kana alphabet to write the world's first novels. We're talking absolute masterpieces like The Tale of Genji. But get this, underneath all that artistic flourishing, the ruling nobility were shockingly incompetent managers. They neglected the outer provinces so badly that by the year 1000, the central government actually forgot how to issue currency. No, really, they literally regressed to bartering with rice and silk. Chapter 2, Warring States and Unifiers. This brings us to the Sengoku period, where all that neglect of the provinces finally plunged Japan into a century of brutal chaos. Out of the ashes of that chaotic Warring States period emerged 3 vastly different men, known today as the 3 Unifiers. Think of them as a ruthless relay team. They utilized distinct, almost sequential strategies to forcibly piece the fractured nation back together. Just watch how this unification builds step by step. First up is Oda Nobunaga, the revolutionary. He aggressively embraced newly introduced European matchlock guns to just completely crush his traditional sword-wielding rivals. Then, his top general, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who amazingly rose up from a humble peasant background, stepped in and completed the conquest. Hideyoshi smartly ordered nationwide sword hunts to disarm the peasantry, basically ensuring no one else could rise up the exact same way he just did. And finally, Tokugawa Ieyasu, the ultimate patient strategist, capitalized on all that groundwork. He won the massive Battle of Sekigahara in 1600 and took total unquestioned control as shogun. Chapter 3, Edo period and Closed Country. So with the country finally unified under Tokugawa rule, the shogunate decided the absolute best way to keep the peace was to just lock the doors. This is the famous Sakoku, or locked country policy. To eliminate political interference from European powers and stamp out the spread of Christianity, Japan essentially sealed itself off from the rest of the globe for over 2 centuries. Foreign trade? Strictly limited to just the Dutch and Chinese at one single port in Nagasaki. And as for Japanese citizens, they were completely forbidden from leaving the country, on pain of death. Talk about a strict border policy. But here's the surprising part. This strict isolation actually sparked a massive internal golden age. Without constant warfare draining their resources, the population stabilized, farming boomed, and Japan achieved an absolutely staggering 30% literacy rate. To put that in perspective, that was one of the highest in the entire world at the time. This wasn't just a fun piece of trivia. This high literacy rate secretly laid the critical groundwork for their rapid modernization later on. Chapter 4: Black Ships and Modernization. Because, as we know from their historical rhythm, this 2.5-century incubation period was about to be violently shattered from the outside. I want you to really put yourself in this scenario. Imagine you're a samurai. You're armed with a traditional sword, you're living in a highly rigid, isolated, feudal society, and then suddenly, you are staring directly down the barrel of the Western Industrial Revolution. In 1853, Commodore Matthew Perry of the U.S. Navy sailed his steam-powered black ships right into Edo Bay. He delivered a letter that was basically a heavily armed ultimatum, forcing Japan to abandon its isolation immediately. And the reality was, the shogunate simply had zero defenses against these massive, modern, exploding shell guns. Realizing they absolutely couldn't beat the West, Japan made a stunning pivot. They decided to join them. This is the ultimate lesson in Japanese adaptability. By 1868, the shogunate fell, the emperor was restored to supreme power, and the Meiji Restoration kicked off. In a single generation, they abolished the very samurai class that had ruled them for 800 years. They built nationwide railways, formed a modern conscript army, and imported Western science. They went from a feudal backwater to a full-blown industrial powerhouse at dizzying speed. And remember that hidden foundation of 30% literacy we talked about? That is exactly what made this lightning-fast transition possible. Chapter 5: Empire, War, and Rebirth. Let's look at how this newfound hyper-fast industrial might pushed Japan right onto a dangerous collision course with the rest of the world. Here was the problem. To fuel its massive new industrial machine, Japan required huge amounts of raw materials like coal and iron, materials that the small island nation simply didn't possess. So Japan utilized its newly learned Western military tactics to aggressively build an overseas empire. They actually stunned Europe by defeating Russia in 1905. But this aggressive expansionism ultimately overextended them. It led directly to the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, which plunged Japan into the devastating, prolonged, and incredibly destructive conflict of World War II. As we know, the war concluded with catastrophic damage to Japan. Following the unprecedented devastation of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, combined with the Soviet invasion of Manchuria, Emperor Hirohito formally announced Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945. This brought the Japanese imperial era to a definitive and deeply tragic close. But true to its historical rhythm of deep incubation and explosive reinvention, Japan rose from the ashes yet again. In 1947, they adopted a brand new democratic constitution guaranteeing individual rights and radically reforming education. By combining their historically high literacy and numeracy rates with these new democratic frameworks, Japan fueled a staggering post-war economic miracle, transforming once again into a peaceful global leader in technology and commerce. So, as we look back on this incredible journey from ancient warring clans to a modern, thriving democracy, we have to ask ourselves, what exactly will Japan's next cycle of transformation look like? Understanding this foundational rhythm of deep incubation and rapid reinvention isn't just about memorizing history. It is the absolute key to anticipating how this incredibly resilient nation will adapt to the challenges of tomorrow. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep your curiosity alive.